Hello, my name is Jim Flick with Deerfield Township. Thank you all for joining us today. This is the follow-up to a discussion we had a couple days ago about what human trafficking is and what it looks like, and how you could be alerted to what's happening in the state of Ohio, and if you suspect anything, the hotline to call and who to reach out to help others in the community. Tonight we have Maria Bush and Bria Combs who will be here to answer questions. I'll go ahead and hand it over to them to introduce themselves. So Maria?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us to talk about this important issue. I think education and awareness is key to learning how to respond to the crime of human trafficking. So thank you. My name is Maria Bush, and I'm the Anti-Trafficking Program Specialist at the Ohio Department of Public Safety, specifically within the Office of Criminal Justice Services. And our team there manages the Governor's Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force.
And I'm Bree Combs. I work with the End Slavery Cincinnati Coalition, and I'm the new regional coalition specialist there. So thank you so much for having us.
Great, thank you. So, we did ask for questions to be submitted in advance, but if anybody does have any questions at the end, we'll go ahead and open up the lines and allow anybody to ask their question and to have a dialogue. But I do have a few questions here, so I'll go ahead and kick it off. So Maria and Bree, someone had asked, do large events in Ohio, for example, football games, do those increase the amount of trafficking incidents or increase the demand for trafficking in Ohio or anywhere that these larger events are happening?
That's a great question. And I think that there is a lot more awareness, especially when there are large events, because there are big pushes to raise awareness and learn the signs and report. I would say there isn't necessarily an increase in the prevalence of human trafficking overall, but there is likely a more maybe concentrated supply and demand, not to be crass. However, the people who are exploited and who are victimized and trafficked are not necessarily only trafficked one day out of the year during a certain sporting event. So trafficking really occurs every day of the year, and it's not necessarily that it's focused around certain events. It certainly makes some intuitive sense that perhaps there are more people purchasing commercial sex around the time where a huge influx of people are going to be in a certain city for a large event. So that certainly makes sense, but I wouldn't necessarily connect it to the prevalence or rate of human trafficking overall. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think one of the unfortunate realities about trafficking is that there's very little data to get a good sense of the prevalence of human trafficking. We've certainly done some studies, and there is some research that has been done, but it's pretty resource intensive to come up with the data and the studies that are sufficient enough to have a pretty solid claim on whether or not that is true or the extent to which prevalence may or may not go up. But that's just my take on that. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Bree?
Yeah, I would just echo what you're saying. There are not hard data numbers that we can get just because all of this is so underground and hidden from, however, I would say that, like you said, I think that these bigger events attract more people, and where there are more people, there are going to be more business like all kinds of business happening. So whether that's food, restaurants, drugs, human trafficking, I think that wherever there are more people, there are going to be more activities happening, more crime, all kinds of stuff, because that's where they're going to get their customer base. And especially I think sporting events are a lot of times geared towards men, so they're going to target those kinds of events more so, I think, than than other events. And I just think that those kinds of events do attract that kind of business, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well said.
Great, thank you. And for anybody that joined, we are going through previously submitted questions right now, and then we'll open it up to any for the folks that might be on this, if they have any additional questions, to go ahead and ask and have a dialogue after we get through these. So then the next question that was submitted, it was asking, how and why is it important to get people involved in trafficking awareness? And you did discuss this a little bit on Tuesday, but I'm hoping that you can get a little, just reiterate, why this is such an important issue to be aware of, and why to, why get involved in that awareness and education.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What an important question. And I think to put it succinctly is that we can't really respond to something that we don't understand. And we know for a fact, based on data and based on the stories of survivors and cases reported, we know that Ohio has a human trafficking problem. There are many, many cases to show for it. There are many individuals, men and women and children, with a lived experience of trafficking who day in and day out tirelessly advocate for more people to learn the signs and understand what victimization looks like. And so we know for sure that there is a problem. And so I think the education piece comes in because we simply cannot respond if we don't know, again, what we're looking for. And I think in the realm of human trafficking, oftentimes we don't know what we're looking for. I think that there are a lot of myths and just misinformation about what human trafficking is and what it looks like in the United States. I know there's a lot of kind of PSAs or certain imagery that portrays this idea that victims are kidnapped by complete strangers and sold for sex. And so then when we are fed these images, or we're fed content like the movie Taken, then we kind of look for this very specific kind of victim, and we tie that to human trafficking. And then when we do that and we don't necessarily have the education to know what trafficking cases have looked like, then we're really missing the victims of trafficking that we're looking for. We're missing the vulnerable runaway and homeless youth. We are missing the adults who are addicted to drugs, who are being coerced by a drug dealer to perform commercial sex acts. We are missing the foreign national who is stuck in a restaurant working day in and day out for no pay because their employer told them that if they tell anyone what's happening to them, they're going to go to jail and get deported. So when we are told this is what a trafficking victim looks like, then we're really missing those who are the most vulnerable and at risk and exploited among us. And so I think education is key. And we're seeing that the more educated we become, the more identifications occur in Ohio and across the country. Right now, Ohio reports the 5th highest number of human trafficking cases to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And to me, I think that's a good thing, because I think it means that Ohioans are becoming more and more aware over the years of what human trafficking looks like and how to report it and what to report. And because of that, we have more cases to show for it. Whereas back in 2012, we absolutely were not reporting the 5th or 4th highest number of cases. But over time, as we learn more, we report more. And so again, I don't necessarily think it's because we have more trafficking now than in 2012. I think it's that because of education, people have learned what to look for. They have identified victims, they have made reports, and because of that, people who were formerly exploited, someone had intervened, and that person is now on a road to recovery and healing and freedom because of that education piece. So I think that's why it is so important.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say, Maria. So well done.
Thanks.
Great. You started to touch on some of the misconceptions, with the the Taken example and the kidnapping, which I think leads very easily into this question. So some people have wild conspiracy theories about trafficking. So how is it that we can know what is true and what's not true?
Oh man, that is that's an amazing question. Yeah, there are some wild conspiracy theories, particularly lately. So I think that there's a few things that we can do to be equipped to handle those, because I don't like to immediately dismiss anything. I think we need to take all tips and all concerns, and pieces of information seriously. And I don't think we just discredit things on their faces. I think what we do is we look at the facts of a theory, or we look at the facts of a tip or a case, and we check that to what we already know about human trafficking. And we check that against logic as well. I think some of the more grand conspiracy theories can be explained by many other components other than human trafficking. One of the first ones that comes to mind is probably the Wayfair conspiracy theory of, the overpriced cabinets being linked to missing kids, because the cabinets had the same name as some of these missing children. And that it's helpful to look at, okay, so what do we know about human trafficking? We know that traffickers disproportionately prey on people with vulnerabilities, or largely trafficked by people they know, in certain venues, street-based prostitution, pornography, all these, restaurants, hospitality. We have this kind of framework for what it looks like, what recruitment looks like, and for what the actual exploitation looks like. And so then we're able to look at a story like the Wayfair example and say, well, it's not really what trafficking looks like. That doesn't really fit the education piece that I've learned. And thinking through, how else could this be explained? And I think that an expensive cabinet that has, coincidentally the same name, is you're more reaching there for, what is the connection to trafficking, as opposed to the assumption that it is human trafficking, just because it's kind of a weird situation. And I think just doing some digging, like in that claim specifically, I know that if you do a quick Google search, some of the names of the cabinets matched people who had been found years ago, and they weren't actually missing children at this point. And so I think even just checking elements of a theory online from credible sources is a really good way to start to, and just checking out some of the fact check articles. So I think those are just a few tips. Is one, does this align with what we know to be true about human trafficking in the US? And two, are there other logical explanations for why these cabinets are expensive, or why there is an extra tag in my article of clothing that I bought at a store, for example. So those are just a few tips. Bree, do you have any other tips that you can think of as well?
I think I just have more comments on that. Conspiracy theories are so believable because they mix some truths in with fabrications, and I think that when something doesn't necessarily make sense, our brains just fill in those gaps so that we make up this horrific story. We go to worst case scenario. I think it's just how our brains are wired, it seems, but we fill in those gaps to make sense of it in our brains, and we don't always get that story correct. And with social media, it's just those things spread like wildfire. And what we've seen is how effective those are, because they get everybody emotionally charged. They want to do something about it. And so they start calling the hotlines. But what that does is it really distracts from the real work being done, because those hotlines are then clogged, and real victims and survivors who are trying to get a hold of services are not able to get through. And so, like you said, I think, education is so important, because when we realize and we know and we understand how human trafficking normally looks, I mean, there's always those cases that are outside of the norm. And those conspiracy theories and those stories certainly deserve to be investigated fully, because like I said, there are truths mixed in normally to make it so believable. But yeah, I think just like knowing the truths about human trafficking and being able to kind of dispel some of those myths as we see them as they come in is helpful, because then we're able to clearly and objectively look at the indicators and the signs. And when we're so focused on being fearful, we're not being aware of what is right around us that we might be seeing that isn't so outlandish and scary. You know, it's the simple, subtle things in life that are right in front of us that we miss. And so I think that's certainly um, certainly why education and awareness is so important, and not always believing everything at first in immediately sharing it. That's it can do more harm than good.
Yeah, Bree, that was perfect. I think that was extremely helpful. And one thing I want to re-emphasize that you said is that there is truth and non-truth mixed in together. And I just want to reiterate that, because you hear stories and you read Facebook posts or whatever that, you know, share something that had happened to somebody at a restaurant, you know, or how someone followed them around a store, or there was a van waiting outside of a store. You know, this is not to say that nothing about that person's experience is not true. You know, it's certainly not to undermine that, to Bree's point. I think that the critical thing there is, okay, man, this awful thing happened to this person. For some reason, a stranger followed them around the store. I think the question then is, okay, is this a correct connection to human trafficking? In some of those instances, probably not, again, because we know kidnapping is not typically how people end up getting recruited into trafficking. And so, yeah, I love how you said that. And I think that's important to remember, to not invalidate somebody's experience, and then to also bring in facts that say, is the connection to trafficking here appropriate and factual?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah, and obviously, like, if somebody's following you and, you know, they're parking a van outside your house, you should call 911. Like, that should not be dismissed. But linking it directly to human trafficking, like I said, it can do more harm than good.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, our next question is kind of a multi-parter, but it all kind of relates to, you know, how these sorts of cases are prosecuted. So the question is, some judges may seem more lenient than others in their sentencing of traffickers. Is there anything that the public can do in terms of advocating for, you know, heavier sentences? You know, why is there such a variation in the sentencing process, and isn't there precedent in how these trafficking cases should be handled?
Great question, and a complicated one for sure. So I think here's one of the biggest challenges with prosecuting a trafficking case is it's very difficult to legally prove elements of force, fraud, and coercion. And those are the requirements, or the legal requirements for a crime to rise to the level of human trafficking. And under state law, it is a mandatory minimum of 10-year sentence for human trafficking. So I think the problem comes in is oftentimes people are not charged with human trafficking, even though the crime they committed was indeed human trafficking. They may get charged, you know, on promoting prostitution or compelling prostitution. There are many cases in which this is the barrier, is getting that trafficking charge, because in order to get the trafficking charge, they have to prove that the trafficker used elements of force, fraud, or coercion to compel the victim to perform commercial sex acts. And doing that, or forced labor. So I'm kind of giving more an example of a sex trafficking case, but I mean, both of them have these complexities, the same legal complexities. And to do that, it's very difficult. And oftentimes prosecutions rely on the witness testimony or the victim testimony of the victim of human trafficking. And in both sex trafficking and labor trafficking cases, the victim most often does not want to testify, or maybe isn't in a position to testify, whether there's a drug component or they're too fearful, because oftentimes victims are threatened even over the course of an investigation by their trafficker. And there's a lot of fear there, and there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of things that keep a victim from being able to do that. And so that's a big part of the prosecution as well. And so there's all these elements that make it very difficult to actually convict somebody on human trafficking charges, which then means that their sentence is likely, I mean, depending on their charges, lower. A sentence for promoting prostitution is going to be much lower than human trafficking, or trafficking in persons is the technical term. So that's largely why there is a differentiate, or a diversity, I guess, of sentencing. And I think something that we can do is to keep training. I think that something that agencies have done a great job of doing is training law enforcement and training investigators on proving elements of force, fraud, and coercion. There are some really good national trafficking trainings for law enforcement on how to build a successful investigation that can be used so that that trafficker really receives justice to the fullest extent of the law. And it requires a lot of training, and it requires experience, because it's very hard to do it. So, and another way around it is increasing the penalties for promoting prostitution, which happened in Ohio. And so the reason for that is because people saw this exact thing. They saw, oh man, all these traffickers are getting charged with promoting and compelling prostitution, but not trafficking in person. So let's raise those penalties as well. So I think there's different ways of doing it, but I think training is key and central to that.
Maria?
Yeah.
Maria, could you also speak a little bit to the shift in blaming the victim and then shifting that towards blaming the actual trafficker?
Yeah, that's a great point, Bree. So I think what you're getting at is the reality that oftentimes it's the victims of human trafficking that are prosecuted. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there is definitely another element to this problem, which is that traffickers are not the ones who are right on the street in plain view that appear to be engaging in illegal activity. Oftentimes it is women who are the ones who are visibly seen in street-based prostitution, or the ones whose pictures are posted publicly online, and it's kind of an easy arrest. Okay, this is a woman involved in prostitution. This person gets cycled in and out of jail. And again, because of the trauma she's gone through, the potential trauma bond, the fear and the threats by her trafficker, she's not going into jail and saying, I'm a victim of human trafficking, and there's my trafficker over there. He's compelling me to do this and telling me if I don't, that he's going to hurt me or my family. And so the actual women who are victims of prostitution, again, don't view themselves as victim, and then our justice system sometimes does not view them as victims either. And there was a study done by the Franklin County Municipal Court some years back, where they screened all the women picked up on prostitution and solicitation related charges, and screened them to see if they fell under the federal definition of a victim of human trafficking. And the study found that 92% of them fell under that definition. And those are women who were all arrested, who are all seen as criminals, of people who are breaking the law. And so there is absolutely a shift that is taking place, a slow shift, where we are starting to realize, oh, the people who appear to be criminals are actually ones who are being victimized by a third party that is pretty obfuscated. And I think the way that they recruit allows them to be obfuscated, because, again, if people were kidnapped by random traffickers they didn't know, that person is going to be inclined likely to try and get that trafficker in prison. They don't have a trauma bond with that person. There isn't necessarily a relationship there. But in the trafficking cases we see, there is kind of a trust, there is a trauma bond, and there is a less of an inclination to report who that person is, so that that person also sees the justice system. So man, it is complex, but I think, yeah, that point is an important one, is that as a community and as a criminal justice system as a whole, there is a shift that is taking place, and there are some really neat specialized court dockets across the state that have intervention in lieu of conviction programming for women who are involved in commercial sex but have other charges. We also have expungement in our state human trafficking law, so that women who have, well, many women who are sex trafficking survivors have very extensive criminal records, just by nature of what we all just discussed, which is that they're cycling in and out of jail on prostitution charges and drug charges and theft. So they have these very extensive records, and Ohio's law says that trafficking survivors can actually apply to the court to get those completely removed from their record, which is really cool. And there are very limited circumstances in which somebody can actually get something expunged. Sealing a record, people can apply for. It's kind of removes it from your record, but it's in this somewhat of a filing cabinet that only a few people can see. Some, such as boards and commissions, which is not great, because if you have a survivor of sex trafficking who now wants to go be a counselor or be licensed through the counselor, social worker, and marriage and family therapist board, they may be able to pull that record, right? But with expungement, it completely destroys it like it never happened. And I think that really speaks also to Ohio's recognition of, okay, these are people who were victimized and exploited, who committed these crimes under the duress of a trafficker, and should be viewed that way, so that they can now go on to get jobs and rent apartments, and get a mortgage. So there's a shift taking place, but there's a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, that was
Good
terrific. And it actually kind of leads into the next question. You talked about trauma bonds, and we talked about how powerful that can be a couple of days ago. And the criminal record and the importance of getting that expunged. This person had asked, once a victim is off the streets and out of their situation, what is the rebound rate, or I mean, I guess we can think of it kind of like the recidivism rate for criminals that get released from prison then end up back in prison. How often do they kind of end up back in this situation? Particularly, this question asked about prostitution, but maybe end up back in the trafficked situation that they were, kind of, that they found their way out of.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a really good question, and a tough one, because I don't have data for you. I don't necessarily have numbers, but I have just kind of anecdotal information, which is to say, because of the complexities of the crime, getting re-exploited is absolutely prevalent. So again, I'm sorry I don't have statistics for you per se, but does that happen? Yes, absolutely. Adults, minors, youth, there is a prevalence of people returning to their trafficker. Again, yes, because of the trauma bond, because of not knowing what else to do. I know we see this a lot with women who are leaving prison. Maybe they were incarcerated for a time period, and then when they're leaving, it's like, well, they don't have any other social supports, and don't really know what to do other than call the only guy that they knew was providing anything for them before they were in prison. And that trafficker is very inclined to come pick them up. And so yes, that is key. And I think, I'm not a social service provider, but I have heard from them who are in the more of the social services field, that it often takes many or several interactions with the client or with the survivor before they permanently leave the trafficking situation. And they're used to having people rebound. They're used to having clients who are involved in their case management who go back to their trafficker. However, there is no giving up there. There is a continual pursuit, and there is a continual, hey, our services are always available to you, and hopes that we as social service providers and responders are able to build a just as strong or stronger relationship and stronger trust and that we'd be able to offer more than what the survivor perceives he or she is getting from their trafficker. And that is always the goal, but that is a huge barrier and obstacle. And that's why, I mean, our service providers are incredible. Just the amount of uh, pursuit there and energy that is poured into making sure that these clients feel like they can trust them as a service provider, and kind of dealing, like walking through, I guess, all the complexities of their trauma. To have that client walk away several times is hard. But that is the call of somebody who's providing direct services to trafficking survivors. Is there is an added complexity there. So yeah, so unfortunately, I'm sorry I don't have data, but I know there is some information that may be of interest to whoever asked this question from an evaluation that was done by Catch Court. And so Catch Court is the specialized human trafficking docket at the Franklin County Municipal Court, which is the one who did that screen. And I do know that of the women who complete the full Catch Court 2-year program, that the recidivism rate is very, very low. Very low. So I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I do know that's low. But I also know that the graduation rate of Catch Court and successfully completing an intensive 2-year program is not as low, and women have a harder time completing it, again because it is difficult to go from the lifestyle of trafficking to you're on probation, you have rules, and you have these appointments, trauma therapy, treatment, all these things. So it's an intensive program. So I know that it's tough for women to complete it, and they don't all complete it. But once they do, recidivism is low. So hopefully that helps there. Do you have other perspectives on that, Bree?
I was just going to reiterate that, in Slavery Cincinnati is definitely there, just like you said, for as many times as somebody relapses and wants to go back to their situation, as many times as they come back, we are there. And we're not going to ever cut anyone off. We're not going to ever deny them services or resources. It is completely up to them. They come freely, they go freely, and we're there. I think it is tough for sure to understand why someone would want to go back to a situation after they finally escaped it. But it's kind of like why, people in domestic violence situations, they stay, and it's hard to understand why they stay or why they go back after they have gotten out. And it can be a lot of different reasons, like you said. Just one example is like if someone's addicted to drugs and they want to get out of their trafficking situation, but they're very tied to that trafficker because that is their supply to those drugs. That's a very difficult thing to walk away from. So the regression is very likely there. The relationship, the trauma bonding, like you said, that person has cared for them. They have this relationship with them that is sometimes familial feeling even. And so, or it is familial sometimes. So just that sense of belonging too is they're walking away from the community that has embraced them, not for necessarily the right reasons, but because they are contributing to that group, that little family, and just feeling like you have a purpose in life, and even no matter what that purpose is, if it's contributing to that family because of what you're earning through your services, then that is a purpose. And if they walk away from that, then they've lost their purpose. So finding that new purpose, reestablishing themselves in the community, getting back up on your feet is difficult. And all of these other things that play into the mental aspect of it they just further exasperate the situation.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Our next question, we did talk a little bit about this on Tuesday as well. Deerfield Township is, a semi-affluent neighborhood, and a lot of people are often told that there's no human trafficking issue in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. But as we know, and as you have stated, where there's quote unquote demand, there's going to be activity, and there's no place in Ohio or anywhere in the country where this doesn't exist. So, what are the things that we need to be on the lookout for? If you could just reiterate, that those types of things that we as a community can be on the lookout for to identify and be alert to in terms of human trafficking.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think oftentimes there is this mentality, no matter where we live, that it's not here. Maybe it's in the city, or if you live in the city, you think, oh, maybe it's overseas. So I think there's always kind of this feeling of it's probably not happening in my community because I don't see it. But I think that's the big challenge with trafficking, is it's hard to see. It's hard to identify. And so, yeah, we can definitely talk through some tips for what to look for. There's probably a lot, so we'll try and cover these. Maybe we can go back and forth, but a few that come to mind. One is illicit massage, just because there is a prevalence of illicit massage businesses in more affluent areas, where people have expendable income. And so those are situations in which women are often recruited from, different impoverished areas of China, some South Korea as well, and then brought to the US, or they come to the United States seeking a job, and then they are placed in this massage business and told they're going to be providing massage and get all this great training on how to provide massage. And then they end up being forced to provide commercial sex acts to customers, because again, there is demand, and when there's demand, it's a very lucrative business, and these business owners know, and the traffickers know, I can get this much money for a massage and this much money for a commercial sex act. And so many of these women are then stuck in these massage businesses, sometimes even sleeping there and living there. Sometimes they're sleeping on their massage tables, or there's mattresses in the back, hot plates where you can tell that people are living there, eating there, storing food there. So I would definitely say be on the lookout for those. And some ways that those could be identified are trying to piece information together. So are they open all the time? Are they open until 10 p.m. every day of the week? Does it seem like all the clients are male? If you went in to schedule an appointment, does that not seem to be an accepted thing? Oftentimes men will post reviews of these businesses right online. There's a website called Rub Maps. You could go on and read reviews from specific businesses, and that would tell you right then and there that, like, very clear evidence of what's actually going on within the confines of that business, or people being transported to and from work in the same vehicle. And what's tough is identifying one of these indicators isn't necessarily, oh, that's trafficking, but essentially, if you look at the context of a whole situation, these can be indicators that help, and that provide some kind of assistance there. Another example that comes to mind are the hotels, because in those affluent areas, there are hotels. There are nice hotels, or there are normal hotels. And one of the more recent cases from the Deerfield Township area involved women who were being forced into sex trafficking within hotels in the area. So I think that's key. Ways to help identify that is if someone is in or around a hotel, trying to get a sense of, do people seem like they are anxious or fearful? Does it seem like there are signs of abuse, physical abuse, scarring, things like that? Or if you're engaging with someone and you notice that there's some kind of tattoos that would indicate branding, I would say that one's tough, and I add a big caveat because a lot of people have tattoos that have nothing to do with human trafficking. But we do know that survivors will talk about experiences of having to get a tattoo that kind of branded or indicated some kind of ownership there. So I would say in the area, certainly there have been cases of women and children who were forced to be sold for sex in the hotels. So that's certainly a location. I would also say labor trafficking is tough, but it absolutely happens all over the state and in different kinds of areas. In areas where there's more farms, it may be in an agriculture setting. In areas where there's just normal strip malls with restaurants, that is absolutely a venue in which trafficking could be occurring. I know that there have been instances in an instance in Blue Ash, I should say, and I speak with a certain survivor of labor trafficking often, and he says it is way more prevalent than we realize. But these are survivors who are not speaking up because, again, there's too much fear involved in that situation, and too much fear in reporting. But these are, again, nice areas, but the demand for free or cheap labor is going to be there. So again, looking for those indicators are fearful, anxious, depressed, avoids eye contact. If you're talking to them and they're giving inconsistent information, inconsistent stories, those could be red flags. So those are a few just examples that come to mind specifically for Deerfield Township that I could see being very prevalent. Another one is the safety of kids online, especially right now when everyone is just kind of online all the time. I think that's critical for anyone who does have kids or takes care of kids. Traffickers absolutely are on apps and trying to meet people in the same way that they prey on vulnerabilities. They do that online as well. And so if there's a kiddo or a youth who's kind of putting all those vulnerabilities out there on social media, and some guy messages her and tells her that she's beautiful and whatever, that's a risky situation. That's a risky situation. Does it always turn into trafficking? No, there's other crimes and other awful things that people do, but certainly that is a gateway into a harmful relationship. So I think especially now, thinking through how can I protect my kids online from predators and from people who are looking to recruit and exploit youth online. And there's a few tools to do that. One of them I would recommend going to, so there's a nonprofit organization in Akron. It's called Rahab Ministries. And on their website, they just developed a tool for helping equip parents to keep their kids safe. So again, it's Rahab Ministries. And if you just find their website, I'm sure that you can probably navigate to the resources or something. And then there's also a resource on our website, which is on the screen, humantrafficking.ohio.gov. And if you click on our resources tab on our website, at the very bottom, I think it might be even the last one on the page, it says Human Trafficking Resource Card for Parents. And that should also be helpful for tips. And it also includes signs and indicators for what to look for in youth who may potentially be victims of trafficking, including, the presence of a controlling, abusive, or older boyfriend, disappearing for blocks of time, possession of gifts or cash that can't be explained, again, because traffickers build these trusting relationships with youth. And so gifts and cash are oftentimes part of that. Kids who are chronically running away, unexplained bruises or injuries, inconsistent stories again. So those are a few examples that come to mind, but I'm sure I am missing some. So I don't know, Bree, if you had other examples that came to mind.
I don't have necessarily examples, but I do just kind of to zoom back out to the bigger picture of that affluent area. I would say that human trafficking is not exclusive. It's not discriminatory, and it affects people of all ages, all races, all genders, all sexual orientations, all educational backgrounds, and economic status. So there are certainly, as long as you have a vulnerability or a need that a trafficker can exploit or fill, there are absolutely ways that anyone can be trafficked, no matter what neighborhood or part of town they live in. I would also say that where there is more wealth, those are often the people who can afford services. And so where there is a demand, there will be the supply. And so I think that human trafficking is everywhere, and it is easy, and it's people want to believe that they're safe and that it's not happening in their neighborhood because they have white picket fences and manicured lawns and nice roads and great buildings to shop in. But the fact is, where there are people willing to pay for services, there will be that opportunity. You just have to look for it, and it's pretty easy to get a hold of. So yeah, I would just say that I'm so grateful that Deerfield Township, the community there, is wanting to learn more about it, because it's kind of one of those myths that we want to believe, that it's easy to believe that, oh, we don't need to worry about this in our area. But the truth is, it affects all communities.
Absolutely, and I would also recommend to anyone that's watching this either live or after the fact to go back and watch the first session that we recorded. It is on the Deerfield Township YouTube page. So if you just go to YouTube and search Deerfield Township, Ohio, you should be able to find it. And we did post the first video from that, which delves into this topic area as well, and may provide a little additional information. But yeah, it does happen everywhere. I mean, there was a case not too long ago in Kenwood, which is just to the south in a very similar demographic community. So, there is, certainly it does happen everywhere. So thank you very much for the information. Just a couple more questions here. Truck stops. What kind of role do they play in this topic area?
Yeah, a big one, a big role. So I don't know if you have heard of the organization Truckers Against Trafficking, but they're a really great advocacy organization that seeks to educate truck drivers with the tools to identify cases of trafficking and how to report. So the reason for that is because certainly traffickers exploit victims of trafficking within truck stops, and so may bring victims, adults and minors, to truck stops, tell them to walk around the lot and meet a certain quota from providing commercial sex acts. Some of the truck drivers have talked about how they can hear it very blatantly on the radios, talking about how somebody is, they have other, terms other than trafficking survivor, but that's what I'm referring to them as. That, oh, it's kind of this normalized behavior where, oh, these women are in a tough place, they're selling sex, and there's kind of this view, I think, or a culture of prostitution still, which of course prostitution is legally a separate issue. However, it's just not as prevalent, and more often it is the case that the women who are selling commercial sex are doing so because somebody else is exploiting them and is using force, fraud, or coercion to compel that person into doing that. And so I think there's another shift there in how truck drivers and people at the truck stops view the women, or even though those who are underage, who they don't necessarily know their age, but they know she's young, something's not right here, and starting to view it not just as, oh man, it's a prostitute, I won't be involved in that, but more as, oh, that's probably a victim of human trafficking, and I need to know what to do right now and how to respond and how to help. And so Truckers Against Trafficking equips them to do that. And there are some really cool testimonies and stories of drivers who have seen something and they knew that it was trafficking just from the amount of information they were able to get, or they didn't know and they just thought, this isn't right. She seems young, or that looks like there's something abusive going on over there. And they make a call. And right then and there, that allows law enforcement to intervene quickly in a situation. And so there's even one story that I know, I think it's on Truckers Against Trafficking on their website, but they even have the survivor share her story and say that that truck driver was an angel in her life because he made the call that changed everything for her and that separated her from the trafficking situation. And so it's critical that they are equipped with this information because they are absolutely frontline responders. I mean, so frontline that people are walking directly up to them and offering commercial sex to sometimes even minors. And so there's absolutely a big intersection there, and a huge opportunity for these truck drivers to do good, because they're so well intentioned. And a lot of times you hear them speak and they say, man, I for so long didn't know what to do. I didn't think I needed to do anything, because it kind of felt like they would be, you know, reporting her. And now they're like, man, I had no idea the trauma and the victimization they were experiencing. And so that's a lot of their stories, and it's definitely powerful to see around. And we also know just from the stories from survivors of sex trafficking themselves who share their experience within truck stops and awful experiences there. And so we know from both sides that is definitely grounds for exploitation and also grounds for opportunity to intervene.
Yeah, just a couple of comments too. That was really a good overview of Truckers Against Trafficking, and they are amazing. They do amazing work, and yeah, truck stops are huge within the transportation of victims, just because, you know, you can get anywhere in the country on the highway system, and so that's a lot of times how they are transported. So I think that the general community, you know, people stopping there for a snack or to use the restroom, like just for them to keep their eyes open, because if they see something shady happening over by the semis, then, or in the bathrooms even, you know, they can also call and report. You know, seeing a child over by the semis is not normal. That's not where kids hang out. It could be nothing, but you just never know. And so having that hotline to call, knowing you know, and just knowing the signs, and if something feels off, where there's smoke, there's fire normally. So yeah, I would just, another thing I heard from the founder of Truckers Against Trafficking is, you know, campers. If there's a camper, and I know campers don't always just fit in the regular car spots, but if there's a camper parked next to a semi, that could also be a sign. It could be nothing, like I said, but it could also be, you know, a trafficking situation where that's their kind of like mobile home, and they're just living out of that and going from truck stop to truck stop offering services.
Great, that's wonderful information. Thank you. So we have two last questions that were submitted previously, and they cover the same topic, so I'm going to kind of combine them. So this person had asked, so I'm afraid that when my child is out of my sight, someone is going to snatch them. How realistic is that? And the second question is, you know, how do kids get into the situation? Is it because of bad homes? Is it someone that knows them that is likely to abuse or traffic them, or is it more likely to be a stranger? And I know you covered this pretty well on the first session, but I think it's very, very important, especially for our community, to understand how do kids end up in this situation.
Yep, I agree. Extremely important. Extremely important. And the first part of the question is how likely is, you know, is a kiddo to be snatched off the sidewalk? How likely is someone to be kidnapped for the purpose of human trafficking? Very, 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 very low. How likely is a kid to be kidnapped? Unfortunately, because my sphere of knowledge is trafficking specific, I unfortunately don't know the answer to the first part. So I don't know the general prevalence of kidnapping or what the risk factors are there. I do know that when we talk about human trafficking, there is very little, if any, overlap there. So hopefully that kind of answers a little bit, and I'm sure, and maybe Brie, I don't know if you have more information about kidnapping in general as a risk, but For my portion, I'll just kind of leave it there. As for trafficking, very little in general. Not entirely sure, just because that's not really my area of expertise. And then what makes a kiddo vulnerable, I think was what the second part of the question was getting at. And there's a few things, but traffickers, we know, prey on vulnerabilities that kids have. And so some of those vulnerabilities are being a runaway and homeless youth, being a youth that is in the foster care system, the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system. These are kids who we know are vulnerable because if they're running away from home, or they're in the system, we know that they probably have certain unmet needs, unmet emotional needs, physical needs. They are probably running away from something, some kind of dysfunction in their home. Most of the time, they have experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. Oftentimes in these homes, they may have been introduced to drugs and alcohol very early on, maybe had little social support, support from parents that kind of watched what they were doing and who they were hanging out with. And so then traffickers know when they are looking for somebody to recruit, they know this person has vulnerabilities. They can see it. And, we hear from survivors all the time. There's everyone has a very different story, but there are certain things that hold true for so many survivors. When they share their lived experience, it was child sexual abuse, it was drugs, alcohol, produced by family members, parents, and over the course of time, developing alcoholism, a drug addiction, and then traffickers spotting all the vulnerabilities from a mile away, coming alongside them and meeting their needs, building trust, building a romantic relationship with them. And so whether that happens in person or whether that happens over social media, we know that vulnerabilities is that common denominator. And when I talk about vulnerable populations, I tend to, speak specifically about the child welfare system, juvenile justice, and those things. But we also know vulnerabilities can be a lot of things, insecurities, mental health. So there are certainly factors. And to Bree's earlier point, trafficking can impact a lot of people. It's not just them over there. It's not just, kids in the system or whatever. I just think those are examples of how those vulnerabilities can be manifest and how they intersect with that vulnerable population. But I think in terms of help and protect our kids, I think it's really coming alongside and supporting them, loving them, being that trusted and supportive adult in that person's life. Sometimes when someone says, what can I do to help prevent human trafficking? One thing I always say is mentor an at-risk youth. Because again, if these kids have social supports and have supportive adults in their lives, a trafficker may not have such an easy time encroaching into that person's life and becoming an important person to them because somebody else has invested in them and cares about them and cares about who they hang out with and has given them directives and direction in life. So I think those are key. But when it comes to trafficking, there should be, very little fear about a kid going to the mall or going on a walk and thinking that someone's just going to kind of snatch them up for the purpose of human trafficking. It's really, how can I protect children from vulnerabilities in general so that a trafficker doesn't come alongside and exploit those vulnerabilities?
Absolutely. And I just want to add one more category. Kids with disabilities, adults with disabilities too, they are very, very vulnerable to abuse and trafficking because they are so independent, because they are very dependent upon others for basic needs like showering and feeding and dressing and medical appointments and transportation and just, a lot of them have communication difficulties, and so when they are abused or trafficked, there's kind of that assurance that they're not going to be able to tell anyone that they won't because they're afraid or they've always been taught to obey authority. So I think also that that is a vulnerability in and of itself. It's just having developmental disabilities.
Yep, great addition.
And just to clarify, part of the question was, is it someone that
Jim, we can't hear you. I think you muted
sorry,
yourself.
there we go. Just to clarify, is it more often than not someone that they know, or is it more likely to be a stranger who preys on the vulnerability?
So it depends. I think it could be both. So a lot of relationships will start somewhere. And so oftentimes, if that person is a stranger to them, then that's kind of how they start their relationship. So whether it's on social media or they're able to build a relationship with them in person, there is, that point in time where they first meet. But that point in time is not necessarily when the trafficking begins. Law enforcement will sometimes refer to this as the grooming period, where I hate using that word, but just using kind of the term in the field, where the trafficker will take a long time to build a relationship with the potential victim. So if they don't know them when they, at first, what they do then is they build a relationship over a period of time. They give them gifts. They build a romantic relationship. They may become physically intimate in order to build more of that bond and trust. So that could be a long time, and that could start with someone who they don't know. Or for adults, that could be somebody who they don't know and offers them drugs, and that starts a friendship between those people. So yes, absolutely. I don't mean to say that it's never, because those relationships have a starting point in which they don't know each other, but they essentially will use a lot of time to build a relationship before exploitation occurs. So that's one way. And then another is that oftentimes someone might be trafficked by a family member, which is a really sad, I think, just result of the drug problem that we have. We've seen cases across the state in which a parent had a drug addiction and would then traffic their child in exchange for drugs. And so in that instance, it's somebody obviously who they know. It's a family member. It's someone who's trusted to them. And so whether that relationship started for the purpose of exploitation or not, once the exploitation occurs, the person exploiting them is someone they're typically well acquainted with, whether that's a family member or the person they perceive as their partner or their significant other, their boyfriend, even their spouse. So at the point of exploitation, not strangers. But sometimes if someone's recruiting someone, there is a point in time where they start that relationship where they don't know each other and then use that time to build it.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that specific point of the first point of contact with traffickers trying to identify those with vulnerabilities that can be exploited. That first initial contact is so crucial for that process, because in that like 2-second window, that trafficker can tell whether or not that individual is able to be manipulated and brought into that situation with them based on how they react to them. So a lot of times, like in malls or whatever, a girl will be walking down the side of the mall, and someone will say to her, a trafficker might say to her, "Hey, good looking." And if that girl looks at her feet and is embarrassed, that trafficker knows that is an absolute win for them, because that girl is not confident. That girl has never been validated, and she has that emotional need, and he can feel it. Yep. But if somebody's walking through and they get that and they're like, thanks, and they make eye contact and they're walking with confidence, they have their shoulders back, they project their voice, they have this air of confidence. That trafficker knows that's not going to be an easy sell. Like that is too much of a challenge. That person already has a well-established sense of self. They have confidence. They have family, friends who have built them up and let them know that they are valuable and worthy. And so that person doesn't have that void for that trafficker to fill. So it definitely, strangers come into people's lives and build that relationship if they see that there is something to exploit there and if there is a void that they can fill.
Yep, very well said.
Well, thank you. The answers to these questions has been very, very informative. At this time, though, if there's anybody on that has any additional questions, please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. Maria and Bree are more than happy. I'll speak for them right now, but more than happy to stay on for a few more minutes and answer any additional questions that you might have. So if there are any, please, at this time, go ahead. And if there's not, Trustee Heading, I don't know if you have any final words that you want to say to kind of close out this session. I do want to take the opportunity to thank Maria and Bree for their time. This information has been invaluable. This video, as well as the previous video, the previous video, as I mentioned, is already on our YouTube page, and this video will be added as soon as possible as well. So please feel free to share with anybody else in the community that might, or even outside the community, anyone that might learn from this information and have more awareness around the very important issue of human trafficking.
Thank you, Jim, for hosting this tonight. You did a fabulous job with those questions. And Maria and Bree, again, your time and your knowledge is something we could never repay you. We could never repay you for spending this time teaching us. I took copious notes, learned so much. I'm very interested in talking to our community and continuing to have these conversations, as well as with my husband, because I learned more than I thought I would learn, from just looking around online. So your expertise is so welcome in our community. Please don't be a stranger. Anything that we can do to help in any way, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And yes, please continue to reach out. Our contact information is here, and so we would love to continue being a resource. We're so pleased that this was helpful, and we were so happy to do it. It's always just a pleasure to be able to provide education and awareness. And so please use this as a resource. Contact us if you're interested in getting involved personally in your local coalition. Bree will be such a valuable contact for you. So take her email address down, visit our websites, call us. However we can be helpful, we want to be. So.
Absolutely. And I also want to say that if anybody would like for us to come and present, or they would like some more specific information on human trafficking as it relates to a certain disciplinary, as far as like healthcare or law enforcement or any of the others, we are happy to, whether we can come and present and educate, or we can connect you with another expert in the field that knows more specifically to that topic. We are happy to work with you and be a resource and give you whatever we can to help you spread the word and learn more for yourself, and just become stronger as a community in your awareness and your ability to identify victims and also protect yourselves and your families. So thank you so much for having us on this training and for taking care of your community in such a way. It just speaks volumes to the leadership that you have in Deerfield Township, and I'm grateful to be a part of it.
And Maria, if it's not too much trouble, just before we sign off, can you throw up the hotline number?
Absolutely.
If anybody does have recognizes any signs or wants to report something that they may have seen, the hotline number in front of you, you guys, I'm sure, can speak more eloquently about this, but please feel free to reach out to this hotline and stay involved.
Yep.
Yeah, and I wish that I had put a slide together with our hotline number too. So this is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. We also have one specifically for the greater Cincinnati area. Either one is absolutely effective. So, but if you would like the Cincinnati one, that number is 513-800-1863. And you can call or
There it
text that
is.
number. There you go. Yep, 513-800-1863. And that is a 24/7 hotline. We have both of those hotlines actually are 24/7. They both have interpreters, so at the ready, and both you can call and text.
Well, great. Thank you. I believe this concludes tonight's virtual town hall question and answer period. Thank you again for your time. And again, please be aware of what's happening in your community. This is a very important topic area. And thank you for your commitment to education and helping the other folks in our community stay safe.